afternoon, and welcome to the CRS Work With Us webinar. We are very, very excited that you've chosen to spend time with us this afternoon, learning about CRS and our upcoming job vacancies. I am Gerri Ratliff, the Deputy Director of CRS, and I wanted to let you know that we will be recording this webinar. So if later you have your camera on, you could become a part of the recording. We will not be recording the Q&A at the end of the session, however. And I would ask that everybody remain on mute, at least until the very end to the Q&A portion. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce CRS Director Paul Monteiro. Director Monteiro is the first in his family to graduate from high school and later graduated from the University of Maryland and the Howard University School of Law. He served on President Obama's White House staff for 5 years as a liaison to faith communities and Arab Americans before being appointed as the National Director of AmeriCorps Vista in 2014. Paul was confirmed by the U.S. Senate in April of 2022 for a 4-year term as Director of the Community Relations Service. Paul, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gerri Ratliff. And Gerri has served as our Deputy Director here at CRS, and I just want to thank her for her service. My name is Paul Monteiro, as was mentioned, and I've had the privilege of leading this component since I started May 23rd of this year. The purpose of today's webinar is very much to share some exciting opportunities at the Community Relations Service, a bit of background about how this component came to be, the special people that work here, the very unique mission that we have, and hopefully a solicitation to all of you tuning in to consider serving at the Community Relations Service as we have opportunities. So we'll have a brief slideshow that we're going to run through, and I'm going to go quickly because I want to quickly get to the practitioners that actually do the work day to day of CRS that make us the special component that we are. So we'll do a quick run through of some slides. I believe someone's going to pull those up. Great, thank you, Mahima. And give you a bit of background in case you haven't heard of the Community Relations Service, because that's easy to miss. And before I actually start from the first slide, if you go to the next one, before we get to this, we have to start in 1870. The Department of Justice came into being in 1870, although you had an Attorney General since 1789. The Department of Justice, the only department named after an ideal, was created very much in the context of dealing with discrimination and violence targeting people because of their race. And that's how you get this department that's focused on combating violence that was targeting African Americans who were recently emancipated. And that's 1870. Fast forward to 1964, you have the signing of the Civil Rights Act, which created this special component. The Community Relations Service was established by Title 10 of the Civil Rights Act and called on us to be a peacemaker in the federal government's effort to address community conflicts arising from race, color, and national origin. This was a law that changed day-to-day life in America. Public accommodations, hotels, restaurants, barbershops, they could turn down people based on their race before this law, but afterwards they had to accommodate all Americans. And so that's where CRS originated from, this landmark legislation that created a team of skilled mediators that would deploy quickly to communities in conflict to hopefully work to find resolution, avoid violence, and make sure that everyone's rights were respected. Next slide. In 2009, our mandate was expanded. The Shepard-Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act, named after Matthew Shepard, the man lynched for his sexual orientation in Wyoming, and James Byrd Jr., the Black man dragged to death by white supremacists in Texas. This law expanded our jurisdiction to say not just work to address community conflicts based on race, color, and national origin, work to prevent the commission of hate crimes that are targeting our neighbors based on their gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, disability, race, color, and national origin. a very wide mandate. And as you can imagine, if you've looked at any news outlet or just been observing developments in our country, unfortunately, almost in all of these areas, we're seeing significant levels of conflict and tension and division in community. Next slide. CRS's services are impartial. We are at all points a third-party impartial. We do not come into communities to assign blame. We don't come into communities to investigate them. We don't come into communities to prosecute them. We are impartial facilitators to help communities find a pathway to resolution that is nonviolent and respectful of the law. Our services are voluntary. We can make approach and offer our services. Communities can clearly request our services. At all points, as long as they're willing to work with us, we're willing to work with them. We can't force ourselves into any local community. Our services are confidential. As you can imagine, we work with a broad range of community stakeholders, elected officials, appointed officials, activists, faith-based leaders, ethnic community leaders. At all points, we keep the information they share with us confidential unless they give us permission to share it. As you can imagine, again, some folks will only talk and work with CRS on the condition that we're not putting out press releases about it. We're not blasting from the rooftops that this is happening. We are a third-party impartial that works behind the scenes to help communities help themselves. And all of our services are obviously no cost. This is your tax dollar hard at work. Next slide. These four buckets sort of outline the big divisions in terms of the services that we provide. Facilitation, convening parties into dialogue to identify solutions. Again, sometimes it takes a third party neutral. In a local community that's fractured, folks that occupy the same space won't talk to one another unless a third party neutral comes in. Mediation, a structured process to reach agreement. Consultation, technical assistance based on best practices. We work nationwide. We bring the best of sort of what other communities nationwide have done in a similar fact pattern to share with the local community to navigate their own destiny. And training, specific skills around discrete areas that can help them improve their cultural competency or skills in a particular area. Next slide. Who we work with is the community, as broadly defined as possible. The only bright line division I would make is that we do not work with people who ascribe to violence as political speech. But we do work with everyone who's willing to roll up their sleeves, to figure out a way, how do we come up with a solution to a tension that is roiling our community, and we're willing to do that in a way that's nonviolent and respects the voice of others. And CRS, again, as a third-party neutral, at all points is working with the broadest swath of folks who are willing to say, I respect the validity of every part of our community, and we're willing to work together to find a resolution and a way forward. Next slide. Service areas sort of outlined here. Administration of justice is a very heavy area where we're doing a ton of work in addressing police community relations, controversial incidents, or allegations of bias or hate incidents and hate crimes. In the education bucket, as you can see, where we have intergroup tensions in schools, alleged bias or hate incidents, alleged incidents of bullying, and then general community relations, where you have demographic shifts, a new group of people who have been relocated to a community or town, language-based conflicts, public demonstrations, or again, alleged bias or hate crimes or incidents. Next slide. And a bit deeper in all of those three buckets, you can see in the administration of justice area, we are definitely trying to work with communities that are having tensions, maybe related to the transgender community, maybe related to law enforcement, maybe related to Muslim Americans, maybe related to Sikh Americans, and then customize information because understandably, in this very diverse nation of ours, every community is a little different. In the education space, K-12, or even colleges and universities, higher education, the school student problem identification and resolution of issues together, a school spirit I'll talk about later in the presentation. The campus spirit, again, we'll give some examples later on, empowering and giving voice to the student body because they are going to be ultimately responsible for producing an environment that's respectful of all voices. And then again, customizing based on the context. And then general community relations, taking that same spirit to a city or municipal level, protecting places of worship forums, which is actually, I think, one of the most subscribed services now in this environment where unfortunately, many of our houses of worship are being targeted by vandalism, desecration of sacred spaces. The dialogue on race, the bias incidents and hate crimes forum, contingency planning. Americans have a First Amendment right to assemble to petition for a redress of grievances, but we want to make sure that it's done in a lawful way that's safe. So the event marshals piece uses CRS to train folks as they want to assemble peaceably to protest or petition for a redress of grievances around a specific issue or a broader set of issues, but to do so in a way that is safe for all of the participants and lawful. Next slide, please. This is a crystal clear example of one of the ways CRS has worked, an incident that really changed the world, the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And following the death of Mr. Floyd, CRS worked with local law enforcement and community leaders to provide rumor control strategies and best practices to diffuse conflict. And working with law enforcement and community leaders, they identified some discrete action steps that helped reduce conflict in Minneapolis, including updating a memorandum of understanding between law enforcement and community groups. CRS has worked in Minneapolis for many years. And so that is an example of some of the ways that CRS, in terms of a brass tacks approach, worked to deal with a case that I think everyone's familiar with. Next slide. In a school setting, Denfield High School, a Snapchat of a Black student with a noose around his neck and the caption, "Gotta hang them all." Obviously, that's something that's going to roil community, raise tension. CRS conducted a school spirit that I mentioned on the previous slide to, again, give voice to the student population because they are the ones that are going to create an environment that's either welcoming or not. Strengthening police and community partnerships in Erie, Pennsylvania, working with law enforcement and the community, bringing together different stakeholders to identify the key issues impacting the community and police relations, pain points, and trying to figure out, or at least start a process to identify a way forward. And that was something that I think bore some good fruit, where we see through an evaluation we did later that the relationship between the police and community is actually improving because of the intervention that CRS provided. Next slide. So CRS provides these services to communities nationwide. And the webinar we're doing today is very much talking about the associate director. The associate director for CRS manages the field. We have offices nationwide that are doing this peacemaking and conflict resolution work. So I just want to go through a couple of specific vignettes that illustrate the work that CRS conciliators are doing in the field. And these are the individuals that will report up to the associate director position that goes live tomorrow. In the New England region, CRS worked with correction center staff in Cranston, Rhode Island to address escalating racial and religious tensions. Even people who are incarcerated have the ability to practice their faith in a manner consonant with the requirements of the facility they're in. But CRS consulted with the correction center staff on best practices to address some allegations of racial or religious tensions. And conducted a hate crimes forum to help resolve some conflicts and created a planning group that hopefully would address future incidents and give, again, the parties to this specific conflict the tools and resources and framework they needed to address the conflicts themselves. Next slide. Also in the Northeastern region, CRS supported the Lakewood Township to address a rise in perceived anti-Semitism, an issue that unfortunately we're seeing even more and more reports around a rise in levels of anti-Semitism. In the Lakewood Township in New Jersey, CRS held a session, actually a series of sessions of mediations in which participants identified key issues and formed a planning group to address perceived negative stereotypes and a climate that was antagonistic towards those in the Jewish community. CRS worked with that planning group to identify processes to create greater unity in a diverse community. And again, the planning group was diverse. Prosecutors, religious leaders, law enforcement, bringing all parties to the table, not to tell them what to do, not to prescribe a way forward for them, but to empower them, connect them, so that they can figure out what will be the best solution for their community in a way that, again, is consonant with the law and nonviolent. Next slide. The Mid-Atlantic region, I think a case that captivated the nation in Charlottesville around the Unite the Right rally in August of 2017. Tensions were clearly high. CRS was, again, playing its quiet but influential peacemaking role to establish a council that brought together different stakeholders from the Charlottesville community. Again, this is not Washington, D.C. This is local stakeholders to draft a vision and agree on a process so that the community could figure out, how do we rebuild trust and a sense of safety following the trauma of what happened in August of 2017. Next slide. Down in the southeastern region, and I'm very happy we're going to have some words from our regional director who covers this part of the country right after me. So let me actually hurry up. In the southeastern region, working with a school district in Terry, Mississippi, following a perceived racial incident at a school. CRS was requested to come in by the Hinds County School District after a Black History Month program was canceled. And so CRS facilitated 2 different student assemblies to, again, have local voices, underscore the importance of diversity, underscore the students' right to free expression, and chart a pathway forward that the residents of Terry, Mississippi could live with. CRS, again, at all points is a third-party neutral, but we help local communities find a pathway forward that everyone can get on board with. Next slide. In the Midwestern region, working with civil rights leaders, law enforcement, and the LGBTQIA community in Detroit after an African-American woman was shot and robbed, reportedly based on her gender identity. CRS helped form a planning group, facilitated dialogues, and organized a forum with LGBTQIA leaders, civil rights officials, and the U.S. Attorney's offices and law enforcement to encourage a dialogue and understanding so that, again, all members of this community could feel safe, supported, and understand the resources available to them to hopefully prevent a crime like that from happening in the future. Next slide. Out in the Southwestern region, the Baton Rouge, Louisiana incident where police and community relations were strained. And I'm so excited that I was able to work with our regional director, Synthia Taylor, back in 2016. And she's going to speak with all of us in a few minutes. Just dealing with bringing together different parts of a community that maybe have been fractured by a traumatic incident to facilitate a dialogue with the U.S. Attorney and, result in the creation of what was called a prayer patrol, a partnership between law enforcement and faith leaders to develop healthy and sustainable relationships between law enforcement and young men 17 to 33 within the parish. Next slide. In the central region, building capacity at the local level in Kansas City, Missouri, protecting places of worship forum, engaging and building partnerships with the Muslim and Sikh American communities out there. And CRS, again, being the third-party neutral to bring together community leaders, government leaders, law enforcement leaders, faith-based leaders to help all Americans, in this case, Muslim and Sikh Americans, feel safe and a part and included in their community. Next slide. Out west in the Rocky Mountain region, because CRS works with the wide diversity of Americans, working with tribal communities, education institutions, there was an incident again where 3 Native American female college students were assaulted, and those incidents were not investigated by the law enforcement associated with their campus. So CRS, again, played that third-party neutral role to bring together tribal leadership, to make trauma counseling services available, convening a briefing for the parents of these 3 women, and provided a hate crimes resource to guide campus law enforcement officials so that if this were to happen in the future, they would have resources to draw on to give better support to the victims. Next slide. And out west, related to a police shooting involving members of the Latino community, CRS provided a series of dialogues providing technical assistance and the first in a series of working group meetings to hopefully rebuild trust between law enforcement and the Latino community. Next slide. In the Northwestern region, out in Eugene, Oregon, because of a sharp rise in alleged hate incidents targeting the Muslim, Arab, Sikh, South Asian, and Hindu communities, CRS facilitated a hate crimes forum, including local and federal law enforcement, community leaders, faith-based leaders, and panelists from civil rights groups, and also connected organizations who could then coordinate efforts. CRS often plays, again, as a third-party neutral, that connecting shuttle diplomat role, which is critical. Next slide. This is our reach. The associate director manages all of these offices. That's the role we're talking about today. But there are also openings in some of these local offices that Deputy Director Ratliff will talk about later in the program. But as you can see, we have a very broad reach around the nation. And that's why the associate director role is critical, because you're managing the diversity of the nation. We're working in suburban, urban, tribal, working in rural areas, even in some of the territories. CRS, funded by your tax dollars, is working to cover as many conflicts as we realistically can. Next slide. This is our, for more information, we hope that today is hello and not goodbye. So that's our phone number, our email address, and our URL link. And obviously we're pretty active on social media, and we're going to be increasingly so in the months and years ahead. But this is a way for you to find out more information beyond the presentation today. I think that's the last slide. I just wanted to end by just talking a bit about like why I work here personally. I was the acting director for CRS in 2016, spent 5 years away and came back after getting confirmed by the Senate in April, started in May of this year. As you think about our jurisdiction, again, as I mentioned, this department, the US Department of Justice, was very much created in response to white supremacist violence that was targeting African Americans in 1870. The Ku Klux Klan and other hate groups were targeting people based on their race. This entire department was created to confront hate violence targeting people because of their race. This component was created, again, in the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and expanded by the Shepard-Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act in 2009. When I think about what's happening in our country, the CRS's mission is incredibly relevant. Sometimes people ask me, why do I start my introduction with, I'm the first in my family to graduate high school? And I'll say it's because I still, maybe as hokey as it sounds, believe in the American dream, because it's worked for me. And so as I think about the mission of CRS at a time where, unfortunately, hate or bullying or incidents targeting people because of their race, color, national origin, gender identity, religion, disability, sexual orientation. On all fronts, there's a lot of work for us to do. And I find so much purpose in working in a place whose specific mandate is to try to equip and empower communities to figure out a resolution that respects the rights of all people and gives them a framework to keep things from being nonviolent. Because if we're going to address the issues that are ailing our nation, it's not going to be through violence. I still believe in the American dream, and I still believe that we can find people of goodwill who are willing to come together, even in a conflict, to find a way that's nonviolent and respects the rights of all people. And I hope that those of you tuning into this webinar feel the same and want to be a part of that work. So with that, I want to turn it back to Deputy Director Ratliff to talk a bit about some of the individuals who do this work day to day that the Associate Director would be managing, and hopefully give you some more details about the role that we're currently advertising for. Gerri?
Thank you, Director Monteiro. I would now like to introduce our next two speakers. who will share with you a little bit about their experience working with CRS and why they are so dedicated to this work. First, Synthia Taylor. Synthia is the Regional Director for the Central, Midwest, Southeast, and Southwest regions of CRS. She has over 30 years of service with the federal government, 23 years with CRS. She has led conflict resolution efforts for many high-profile cases, such as the civil unrest and the aftermath of the shooting death of Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge. Regional Director Taylor and her team were recognized by the Attorney General's office for their outstanding work in the Brunswick, Georgia case after the killing of Ahmaud Arbery. Our second speaker coming up is Justin Locke. Justin is the Senior Counsel to the Director. He previously served as Special Assistant for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander issues, and as a conciliation specialist in the San Francisco field office, and prior to that, the CRS Midwest Regional Office. Justin also is the current co-lead for the Northern California Regional Network of the White House Initiative on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. Regional Director Taylor, over to you.
Thank you, Gerri. And it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'd like to share a little bit about my experience coming to CRS. I came to this agency and worked with civil rights legends, one being Ozell Sutton, who was the regional director for the Southeast region when I came on board. Now, at the height of civil rights struggles in the 50s and 60s, Ozell Sutton was a key player at many of the movement's most critical moments throughout the South. He was present at events such as the 1957 Central High School desegregation crisis and the 1965 Selma, Alabama March. When Dr. King was killed in 1968, Ozell Sutton was there at the Lorraine Motel. Another legend that I had the pleasure of working with was Rose Ochi. She was the director of the Community Relations Service when I came on board. Ms. Ochi spent her formative years locked up in an American concentration camp. Throughout her life, she faced racism and sexism. That experience motivated her to challenge unfairness and injustice throughout her career. In 1997, President Clinton called upon Rose Ochi to be the Community Relations Service National Director. She was unanimously confirmed by the Senate, becoming the first Asian American woman to serve in that role. She represented DOJ on the President's Initiative on Race and the department's arson task force, church arson task force. That's why I say that I came into the company of civil rights legends. Now, in 1999, I was working as an alternative dispute resolution specialist with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. I came across a vacancy announcement for a conciliation specialist position within CRS. I was intrigued as I read the vacancy announcement, which stated that CRS's conflict resolution services were not related to one-on-one conflicts, but the agency provided services to community stakeholders, law enforcement, city officials, all who were experiencing conflicts on the basis of race, national origin, and color. The local contact on that vacancy announcement was Ozell Sutton. I called the Atlanta office to inquire about the position, and to my surprise, he took my call and immediately began to provide me with an overview of CRS's role within DOJ. I applied for the position and hoped for the best. Obviously, it worked out. I was hired as a conciliation specialist, promoted to a senior conciliation specialist, then to the position of regional director. One of my earliest memories after coming on board with CRS was going to North Carolina to monitor a protest at the state capitol. And I see one of the parties who was a lead specialist on that, Tommy Battles. Thank you for being on this call, because he was with me on that deployment. And I recall a sense of pride as I overlooked the enormous, well-organized crowd that gathered to have their voices heard in opposition to and in support of the flag being flown over the Capitol. I marveled at CRS's role with ensuring that the rally was in place constructively and peacefully. From that moment forward, I knew that this was my calling, that this is where I needed to be, and this was the work that I was meant to do. Now, throughout my 23 years with CRS, our mission has expanded to include gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, and religion. And our agency continues to evolve and change to develop programs that strive to strengthen relationships in the communities that we serve. Now, as you can see about my career path, there are opportunities for growth within this agency. So I would say if you have a desire to work with stakeholders to resolve community conflicts and to prevent and respond to alleged hate crimes, this may be the place for you. Now, I'm not alone in my decades of service to CRS. Many of our employees have been here more than a decade. This is a testament to our commitment to this agency and to the services we provide. Thank you. I'll toss it over to you, Justin.
Thank you, Cynthia. So my name is Justin Locke. As Gerri mentioned, currently serving as the Senior Counsel to the Director. I just wanted to talk a little bit about sort of my experience with CRS and to make an appeal to you all, the 100+ folks that are joining us virtually to join us because we need you. CRS is really a unique opportunity and a unique opportunity to serve America, as Paul said, in a capacity as a peacemaker. Your role will involve everything from meeting folks in church basements to community centers, libraries, police departments, longer halls to high school gyms. You'll see the full diversity of our country and also the full diversity of tensions and issues that arise because of community-based conflict. And so whether or not you're a law enforcement professional, an educator, an advocate, an attorney, or whatever your background is, you have something to bring to this type of work. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the recent work that I've been involved with in response to anti-API hate. If you take a look at the CRS website, there's an interactive timeline that begins 1965 with the Selma to Montgomery marches is the first entry on that timeline. And where we are on the timeline right now, it ends up in 21, talking about some of this work. I've had the chance to, as Paul said, engage with local communities to extract from them solutions that work for the stakeholders involved. And that's run the range of contingency planning for vigils in Gwinnett County, Georgia, following the shootings at a spa in Atlanta, a cleanup and PPE distribution involving Black and API chambers of commerce in the East Bay here in Northern California. Efforts to commemorate and memorialize victims of hate, both individual and collective across the country through things like street renamings and other creative expressions of community to help them heal. So working with law enforcement, prosecutors, and community patrol groups in New York City to better improve both reporting and law enforcement response to allegations of race-based violence. I will say that this job is challenging. You'll be called upon to employ the full range of your skills and experience, your networks and creativity, your entrepreneurial drive, and your integrity in everything that you do. So you would be prepared to work evenings, weekends, and as many of my colleagues are well aware, on holidays and when the rest of your peers may be resting and relaxing. And I think that that's a really great testament to the work that the CRS does, the commitment of the folks that we have to bring the whole of their identities to this work. And I think that that is again, one of the unique aspects of doing this sort of peacemaking at the CRS. And so when being asked to speak to you all today, again, 100+ folks from across the country from very diverse backgrounds, but somehow you were called to at least get more information about the CRS, about the work that we do as America's peacemaker. And so again, I would just encourage you all to answer this call to service. As Paul said, we're asking for people not only to work for the CRS, but to serve the CRS and ultimately serve this country. if you look at that timeline, the interactive timeline, and I don't know if this is a product of web design or just the way it is. Again, it begins at the inception of 1964, the signing of the Civil Rights Act, and there's space to the right of the current day. In fact, it goes on for several decades, I believe. I would just ask you to imagine and envision your place on that timeline, what you can do, what can you bring to reduce community-based tensions and to move this country towards peaceful resolution of those conflicts. And if you can see yourself on that timeline, if you can see your role in helping communities come to these solutions that are locally generated and sustainable, then CRS is the place for you. You should definitely answer that call to apply. Finally, I do want to say that this work requires, as I said, both a degree of integrity and also hubris. In the work that we do, and I think rightfully so, the CRS has been fairly low profile in its approach to working with communities. In not seeking publicity, which is in fact actually encoded in the mandate, in the legislation that created the agency.
Yeah,
and I think that
said I was on the phone.
That again is something.
Sent a short one, I think he told me, right? Yeah.
I'm sorry. I think there's somebody that's not on me, but that's okay. But anybody who's called to this work also has an ingrained instinct for hubris, the ability to listen to folks, and the ability to empower those that aren't empowered, but that nevertheless have the potential to do so and to make change in the communities. And so with that, I wanted to hand it back to Gerri and the rest of the presentation, which will go over some of the nuts and bolts, navigating this labyrinth of USA jobs and the posting. And again, I'm just so thankful that everybody here took the time out of your days to listen to us.
Thank you, Justin. I know this is not part of the program, but I'm going to assert a director's priority real quick, because I do need to mention, I see on this webinar, Tom Battles, an individual who gave decades to this component as a regional director to some of the, I think, most controversial, acrimonious community conflicts this nation has seen. And I'm just glad to see your name on this webinar. And out of respect, I just wanted to acknowledge you, Tom Battles, because you gave a lot to this component. So I'm sorry to interrupt. Gerri, over to you. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Justin. And hello, Tommy. So glad you are with us. Any time with Tommy is added value. So I now have the pleasure of helping you all do a little bit of a dive into how to apply, not just to a CRS vacancy, but to any federal vacancy. But we want you to, if you have the passion that you've heard from the speakers on this webinar for our work, we do invite you to find a vacancy, whether posted now or coming up soon, that you think you would be a good fit for. And please, we encourage you and invite you to apply. So I'm going to just walk through a sample vacancy. This happens to be the associate director vacancy that opens tomorrow. But the pointers will apply to any kind of a job application. So first of all, you may know that all CRS, as with all federal government career jobs, are posted here at usajobs.gov. This is the key. This is the portal. This is where all the information is for all CRS career jobs, as well as, like I said, all Department of Justice and the rest of the federal government jobs. If you're not familiar with the website, it's worth it to just go on, even if there's not a vacancy you immediately want to apply for, just to become familiar with it. Go ahead and set up an account, upload your resume. There's things you can do to get ready to act quickly when we do post a vacancy that you would like to apply for. And we also invite you to sign up for our newsletter. We will put in the chat how to do that, how to let us know you're interested. And we do send out through our newsletter, it's an e-newsletter, notices about all of our vacancies. So just to begin, oops, seem to jump down to the bottom. Sorry. Like, oh, I'm in a little box. There we go. Just to kind of start walking through this particular vacancy. And to let you know, we either have or intend to post soon quite an array of jobs from the GS 12 level all the way up through GS 15, and in the future are very likely to be posting jobs at the lower grade levels as well. So another thing you can do on USA Jobs is set up automatic notifications where you can tell them your parameters, send me a notice about every CRS job or every CRS job in Atlanta or in San Francisco, or at every CRS job at a certain GS level. And the system will automatically send you those, which is important because often when a vacancy posts, like you can see here, this says, this job will open tomorrow through 11/24, or when we receive 100 applications. So we can't guarantee. If you wait till 11/24, you may go on to USA Jobs and find out, oh my goodness, they reached 100 applications. It closed a few days ago. You're out of luck. So it does behoove you to set up those automatic notifications or check the website frequently. And when you do see a vacancy, apply as soon as you can. When we post notices for vacancies, they can be in one of two categories generally. One is called, is under delegated examining, and this is not a term you need to remember, but procedures, which allows all members of the public, US citizens, to apply. And you find that information right here. And then there's specialized categories as well for some folks who were displaced from other federal jobs to also be able to apply. But even if you're not already a part of the federal government and have what we call merit status, you can apply to any of our jobs that are open to the public. And that's where you'll find this right here. We do post some jobs that are only open to current federal employees with merit status. And that also would be indicated in this area. But we post most of our jobs open to the US public. So this format that you see here will be the format all of our job vacancies follow. You'll be able to see over here on the right, opening and closing dates, salary, where the job is located. So the associate director job is here in DC. Remote, no. Telework eligible, yes. Travel, all of our jobs that are over casework do require a significant amount of travel. We say 25% or less here, and that is sort of maybe in the course of a year, it would be probably 25% or less, but there's definitely spurts where it could be, you could be deployed and on travel for weeks or even months at a time for very significant cases. We do give you breaks and let you go home to rest a little bit, but that 25% is an average over time. We do usually include the reimbursement of relocation expenses in accordance with the government policies, because we don't want to disadvantage anyone who doesn't already live here, in this case in DC. We truly want all eligible, interested applications from wherever you may currently be living, and not have the thought of having to move and the expense of that stop you from applying. All of our job vacancies will show the duties, and it's really important to pay attention to this because the duties description will give you clues, not just about obviously what the job will be, but what we're going to be looking for the most successful applications. So pay a lot of attention to these words, and to the extent that you have experience in any of these areas, you need to make sure your resume very clearly spells that out. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Requirements, conditions of employment this is very standard. And then you'll see for each of our jobs, the qualifications. Again, you have to pay a lot of attention to the details. And I would say the most important thing, the biggest tip I can give you is look for this right here, specialized experience. And to the extent you do have this experience, so that's going to be my given, right? You're going to apply to this. You do have 1 year of experience doing these 3 things. Put it on your resume in clear language. Spell it out. Don't hesitate even to use these exact words. Again, if you do have this experience, I know sometimes people think, oh, I don't want it to look like cut and paste. I do have the experience, but I'll just reword it or summarize. When the HR office is looking to see who is most qualified, they will be looking for this specialized experience. And so if you truly do have the experience that these words connote, it is okay and a good idea to use these words. Again, if you don't have the experience, you don't have the experience. But if you do, don't hesitate to use the language that we show in our specialized experience statement. That's what we're looking for. The HR office will as they're looking at the whole application, be comparing it to what's in your resume to make sure it's all consistent. Some of our jobs allow for education experience to count as part of the eligibility. At this level, the GS-15, it's not relevant. And then some of this language is a little technical and may not be anything that you would be interested in today. But suffice it to say, all applications are treated consistently according to the same process. And the applications that are found to be the most qualified will be forwarded on to us to be able to take a look at those resumes and decide who we want to interview. I'm going to scroll down here. There's a lot of detailed information that you do need to pay attention to. This spells out tips on what you would need to cover in your resume. It can sometimes feel very repetitive to keep saying, 40 hours a week, 40 hours a week or whatever, but don't worry about that. Just make sure you're following what this announcement or the announcement you're applying for is asking for. And then there's one more thing I wanted to point out. When you're applying, you will actually go into an application portal or system that I will not be able to pull up right now. But when you're in there uploading your information, your resume, etc., you will have access to an online application questionnaire. And that questionnaire will ask you questions that relate to the specialized experience and competencies that we're looking for. And often your response choices will be like, if one of them says, I have experienced mediating complex conflicts, let's say. Your response choices might range from 1, I've never done this, to 5, I'm an expert at this. And we have found that sometimes people who are very, very qualified, just through an interest in not looking like they're tooting their own horn, everyone likes to, our applicants are humble people who don't want to look like they're shouting about how qualified they are. So we do find that sometimes people will hesitate to check number 5. Yes, I'm an expert. They'll go, oh, I'll just say I'm number 4. I'm pretty good at this, right? And probably the most important thing I can say to you today, in addition to make sure your resume spells out your experience, is don't be humble, don't be shy. You can do those things in other contexts. In this case, if you don't claim the experience you have, you will be disadvantaged because other folks will, and they will rise to the top, and possibly you will not be referred for interview, even though it may be that if you had just really claimed your experience, you would have been referred for interview as well. So this is not a time to be humble at all, but it's also not a time to overstate. That also, if we check what people claim against their resume and find they're overstating, then they will be downgraded accordingly, of course. If you have questions, especially technical questions about one of these announcements, every announcement here at the bottom will have an HR contact, phone number, email, who is available to answer your technical questions. You also can contact this person even after you've applied to say, what's the status? And there's someone that you can stay in touch with. They welcome that. That is a part of their job. So I'm going to stop sharing, but I want to make sure everyone has written down usajobs.gov. Go in and set up your account before the last minute so that you're ahead of the game, and sign up for our newsletter. I wanted to just, before I turn it over for questions, just let you know, today on USA Jobs, we do have a GS 1213 conciliation specialist vacancy that is open through November 14th for 100 applications for jobs in, so if you're interested in any of these areas, Los Angeles, Kansas City, and either Albuquerque or El Paso, that part of the country, one person for that area. And then very shortly, we will be posting a regional director position, so it's a GS-15 position, either to be hired either in Boston or Philadelphia. And then, of course, the associate director position we were just looking at goes live tomorrow. So I hope that demystifies the process a little bit for everybody.